My name is Cora Hayes. I'm 28 years old, and my life is measured in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of aging paper. I am a librarian in Port Blossom, a small coastal city that clings to the mainland like a barnacle to a ship's hull. Here, the fog rolls in thick and damp, softening the edges of the world, and the mournful call of the foghorn is a more reliable companion than the sun. I have always preferred the quiet corners of life, the stillness found in the stacks of the public library, the gentle rhythm of the tides. I suppose I became the person my family needed me to be, still water, reflecting their brilliance without ever producing a ripple of my own. Our family was a small, tightly wound solar system, and my younger brother, Julian, was its blazing sun. My parents, Margaret and Arthur Hayes, were the frantic, devoted planets caught in his gravitational pull. I was a distant moon, pale and orbiting, my only purpose to be a silent witness to his glory. Julian, at 25, was a competitive sailor, a golden child with eyes the color of the summer sea and a charm that could disarm anyone. He had a natural talent for harnessing the wind, for commanding a vessel against the whims of the ocean. My parents saw him not just as their son, but as their legacy, a living testament to their own unfulfilled ambitions. They poured everything into him. Their time, their savings, their emotional energy, it was all currency for Julian's success. The living room of our family home, a handsome but drafty colonial overlooking the harbor, was not a space for living, but a museum for Julian's triumphs. His silver trophies for regattas won up and down the coast had long ago displaced any photographs of me. The shelves were lined with books on nautical strategy and yacht design. The refrigerator was stocked with the specialized, high-protein foods his trainer demanded, while I often made do with whatever was left. Dinners were not conversations, but recitations of Julian's training logs, my father dissecting wind speeds and tactical errors, my mother fretting over his diet and sleep schedule. I was simply the one who ensured the house ran smoothly in the background, the quiet manager of their domestic lives, laundering his sailing gear and making sure his favorite meals were ready when he returned, salt-crusted and triumphant, from the sea. I had moved back into that house a year prior, after the rent on my small apartment downtown became untenable on a librarian's salary. I told myself it was a pragmatic choice, a way to save for a down payment on a place of my own, a small cottage perhaps, far from the water's edge. But deep down, in a place I rarely admitted to myself, I think I returned searching for a sense of belonging I had never quite found. I was still harboring a child's foolish hope that if I were helpful enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough, I might finally carve out a space for myself in their hearts. It was a hope that withered a little more each day. The house was not a home, it was a high-pressure system, and Julian's moods dictated the weather. I saw the warning signs, the dark clouds that gathered on his brow. I was not blind to them. I saw the way a room could fall silent, thick with tension, the moment his temper began to fray. I saw the splintered wood on his bedroom doorframe from a time he'd slammed it with his full force, a story my mother explained away as a settling of the old house. I saw the way his last girlfriend, a sweet girl named Sophie, would flinch at his sudden movements before she stopped coming around altogether. I saw it all, and I said nothing. In the Hayes family, loyalty was measured in silence. To speak of the unpleasant, to acknowledge the cracks in the perfect facade, was the ultimate betrayal. And I, above all, was a loyal daughter. The day it happened began with the steely gray light of an autumn morning. It was the final race of the season's most prestigious regatta, the one that could have secured Julian a spot with a nationally sponsored team. The whole week had been a crescendo of nervous energy. My mother had been lighting candles at the old Maritime Chapel. My father had been pacing the floors, checking weather charts on his tablet every 5 minutes. Julian lost. He didn't just lose, he came in near last, disqualified on a technicality after a tense, aggressive maneuver against a rival. He came home late that evening, long after the sun had bled into the cold Atlantic. The air was still and cold, the house dark except for the small lamp I'd left on in the kitchen. I was sitting at the heavy oak table, mending a tear in one of the antique linen napkins my mother cherished, a small, calming, domestic task. The front door opened and closed with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Julian stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. The smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves, sharp and bitter. His face, usually so animated and confident, was a thunderous mask. I kept my head down, my fingers working the needle through the fine cloth. I was trying to become part of the furniture, to fade into the quiet shadows of the room. "What are you looking at?" he snarled. His voice was rough, dredged up from a place of deep, raw anger. He threw his duffel bag onto the floor. It landed with a wet, heavy slap. "Nothing, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I was just mending this." He stalked to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of beer, and twisted the cap off with a violent jerk of his wrist. He leaned against the counter, his presence sucking all the air from the room. "This whole season," he muttered, more to himself than to me, "a complete waste. The committee is run by idiots." I looked up, my heart aching for his disappointment, for the crushing weight of my parents' expectations that now rested squarely on his shoulders. In that moment, all I wanted was to soothe him, to be the good sister, the quiet harbor in his storm. "It was just one race," I offered gently. "The sea will still be there tomorrow. You'll have other chances." I even managed a small, hopeful smile. "It's not the end of the world." That was my mistake. My simple, well-intentioned words were not a comfort. To him, they were a dismissal of his pain, an unforgivable minimization of his failure. It was the spark to the gunpowder. His eyes, which had been clouded with a brooding fury, went flat and cold. "What did you say to me?" he whispered. The sound was more terrifying than a shout. It was a low, menacing hiss that slid across the silent room. "Nothing. I just meant—" I never finished the sentence. He moved with a sailor's sudden, explosive speed. One moment he was by the counter, the next he was towering over me. His hand shot out and clamped onto the front of my sweater, his knuckles grinding into my collarbone. He was so much bigger than I was, his strength honed by years of wrestling with ropes and sails. He hauled me out of the chair as if I weighed nothing, my feet stumbling to keep up. He dragged me the few feet across the kitchen and slammed me, with all his force, into the sharp corner of the granite island. The air rushed out of my lungs in a single, agonizing burst. A white-hot, searing pain exploded in my side, so intense it stole my vision. The world dissolved into a pinprick of light. I crumpled to the floor, the polished slate tiles cold and unforgiving against my cheek. I remember the desperate, futile struggle to draw a breath, my diaphragm spasming uselessly. And then came the kick. Through the hazy fog of pain, I saw his leg draw back. He kicked me squarely in the ribs, right on the point of impact where I had hit the counter. A sickening, wet crack echoed in the kitchen, a sound I felt reverberate through my entire skeleton. After that, there was only darkness. When consciousness returned, it was in fragments, each one pierced by a fresh wave of agony. Breathing was a shallow, desperate act, each small inhalation a new encounter with the fire in my side. I was still on the kitchen floor. My mother was kneeling beside me, her hand hovering just above my shoulder, not quite touching me. But she wasn't looking at my face, at the tears tracking through the dust on the floor. She was looking anxiously towards the hallway, listening. "Cora," she whispered, her voice tight with a cold urgency. "Your father's coming downstairs. You have to get up." I tried to push myself up, but the pain was a physical wall, insurmountable. I could only manage a choked gasp. I can't breathe." Her gaze finally met mine, and what I saw there broke something deeper than bone. There was no sympathy, no maternal softness. There was only raw, undiluted fear. But it wasn't for me. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more chilling than any shout. "You tripped. The rug bunched up and you fell against the counter. Do you understand me? You say that you tripped." She paused, her eyes pleading with a terrifying intensity. "You know how he gets. He's under so much pressure. A scandal like this, it would destroy his chances. It would destroy everything. He had shattered a part of me, and she was worried about his chances." The coldness of it settled into my marrow. I somehow managed to crawl, inch by agonizing inch, out of the kitchen and into the small downstairs powder room. I fumbled with the lock and slid down the wall to the floor, my body racked with tremors of shock and pain. Through the thin wood of the door, I could hear their muffled voices. My father's low, angry rumble. My mother's frantic, pleading tones. And then I heard Julian's heavy footsteps going up the stairs, followed by the definitive slam of his bedroom door. He had gone to bed. It was then that my mother's voice came, clear and sharp through the door, a final, precise incision into my already wounded spirit. "Be quiet in there, Cora," she said. "Think of what this will do to him." The next morning, the pain was a ravenous, living creature curled inside my chest. Standing straight was impossible, taking a full breath was a fantasy. My father, Arthur, looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup, his face a mask of stone. There was no, "Are you all right, Cora?" There was no, "My God, what happened?" There was only a cold, clipped command. "Get your coat. I'm taking you to the walk-in clinic." The drive was conducted in a heavy, suffocating silence. He stared straight ahead at the road, his jaw tight. "You tripped and fell down the last few stairs," he said, the words flat and rehearsed. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. "That's what you're going to tell them. Your mother is a wreck. Julian is beside himself with worry over you. The last thing we need is any drama. Promise me, Cora." I was so broken, so conditioned for compliance, that I simply nodded. A single, tearless dip of my chin. What was one more lie in a life built on them? At the clinic, the harsh fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the throbbing in my head. A kind but busy nurse took my vitals and asked what had happened. I recited the line my father had fed me. I fell. Down the stairs. The words felt like ash in my mouth. Then the doctor came in. She was a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a calm, centered presence that felt like an anchor in my swirling sea of pain. Her name tag read Dr. Lena Petrova. She looked at my chart, then at me, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than was purely professional. She began her examination, her touch gentle and sure. When she pressed lightly on my side, a cry of pure agony tore itself from my throat before I could stop it. "I'll need to get some x-rays," she said softly, her expression unreadable. "But first, I want you to be honest with me." She pulled a small stool over and sat down, so we were at eye level. "Cora, the pattern of bruising here, this concentration of trauma, it isn't consistent with a fall downstairs." She leaned in a little, her voice dropping into a confidential, protected space. "Did someone do this to you?" I froze. My father was in the waiting room, probably drumming his fingers on the armrest, expecting me to emerge with a prescription and a story he could manage. My entire life, my family had looked at me, but they had never truly seen me. They saw a quiet daughter, a useful helper, a potential complication. But this woman, this stranger, looked at me and saw the truth of my pain etched onto my skin. The dam I had so carefully constructed inside myself, the one that held back a lifetime of quiet hurts and unspoken resentments, began to fracture. Tears, hot and thick, welled in my eyes. I can't, I stammered, the images of my father's cold fury and my mother's desperate pleading flashing through my mind. "Please." Dr. Petrova didn't push. She simply nodded. "All right. Let's get those images." After the x-rays, she returned to the examination room and closed the door firmly behind her. She clipped the films onto the lightbox, the stark black and white images illuminating the clinical space. I could see them clearly, the dark, jagged lines snaking across my own bones. "You have 2 broken ribs," she said, her tone professional but laced with an undeniable gentleness. "And a 3rd with a hairline fracture. An injury like this, particularly the nature of these breaks, requires a significant and direct application of force. A blow or a powerful kick." She quietly took several photographs of my bruised side with a clinical camera, her movements efficient and deliberate. Then she turned back to me, her warm, steady gaze holding mine. "I am a mandated reporter, Cora. That means if I have reason to suspect that a crime has been committed, especially an act of domestic violence, I am legally and ethically obligated to report it to the authorities. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to understand the gravity of my question. Did someone do this to you? The world seemed to fall away. It was just me and her and the illuminated image of my own brokenness. It was a lifetime of silence weighed against this one, terrifying chance to be heard. I looked at the X-ray, at the undeniable, skeletal proof of what he had done. I looked at this doctor, a woman who was willing to stand up for me when my own mother and father would not. In a voice that was little more than a ragged whisper, a sound that felt foreign in my own throat, I told the truth. My brother. The words hung in the sterile air, small but immense. The dam broke completely then, and I began to sob, a torrent of grief and fear I had held back for years. Please, I begged her, the words tumbling out between gasps. Please don't. You don't understand. It will tear my family apart. It will ruin his life. His life. Dr. Petrova's voice was firm now, cutting through my panic, but it was not unkind. Cora, he broke your ribs. What about your life? I cannot and I will not ignore this. My primary responsibility here is to you, my patient. And just like that, the choice was no longer mine to make. It was a terrifying abdication of control, and at the same time, the most profound relief I had ever known. She made the call. Because I was an adult living in the home where the abuse occurred, social services were notified, and they, in turn, contacted the Port Blossom police. By the time my father drove me home, the world had irrevocably shifted on its axis. A police cruiser was parked in our driveway, its presence a stark and jarring violation of our carefully curated world. The moment I stepped through the door, the betrayal from my family was a physical force, immediate and absolute. My mother's face, when she saw me, was contorted with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. What did you do? She shrieked, her voice cracking. My father grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscle with bruising force. I told you, he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath sour with anger. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You just destroyed your brother. I hope you're happy now. But for the first time, I wasn't really listening to them. The thick fog of fear and obligation that had shrouded my entire life was beginning to burn away. While they yelled, while they directed all their frantic, panicked energy toward protecting the son who had brutalized me, I walked past them. My ribs screamed with every step, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I went to my bedroom, pulled out the suitcase I had never fully unpacked, and began placing my clothes inside. I had no plan. I had no destination. I only knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the bones Julian had broken, that I could not spend another second in that house. I was done being their quiet, convenient moon. The sun had finally burned me, and I was pulling myself out of its orbit. The first few weeks were a disorienting blur of pain, paperwork, and the dawning, terrifying reality of being utterly alone. Dr. Petrova was my only anchor in the storm. She gave me the phone number for the Harbor Light Women's Network, a local organization that helped women fleeing domestic violence. Their primary shelter was full, but a caseworker named Elena spent hours on the phone and found me a small, subsidized apartment in a part of the city I barely knew, far from the polished waterfront district and the scent of the sea. It was a single room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom, the walls a depressing shade of beige and the furniture sparse and mismatched. But the door had a deadbolt I could turn myself. It was safe. It was mine. One of the first things I did, my hand trembling so hard I could barely hold the pen, was go to the county courthouse and file for a restraining order against Julian. Standing before the clerk, speaking the facts of the assault into the sterile, official record, was one of the most difficult and profoundly liberating acts of my life. I felt a single stitch of a new self being sewn into place. My family, of course, did not go quietly. The calls and texts were a relentless siege. My mother left long, weeping voicemails, arias of guilt and accusation about how I was tearing the family apart, how Julian wasn't eating, how my father's blood pressure was dangerously high. My father sent terse, threatening texts about cutting me off financially, as if the pittance I saved by living under their roof was a greater loss than my safety and dignity. They tried every weapon in their arsenal, Guilt, shame, anger, even a clumsily worded text apology from Julian that I was certain my mother had typed herself. After a week of this emotional barrage, I did something the old Cora would have never dared to do. I blocked their numbers. All of them. The silence that followed was deafening and beautiful. Dr. Petrova connected me with a pro bono lawyer, a woman named Nadia Moro. Nadia was everything my family was not: direct, fierce, and entirely on my side. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense attitude that I found immensely comforting. She listened to my story not with pity, but with a focused, righteous anger. On her advice, I filed a civil lawsuit against Julian, not just for my medical expenses and lost wages from work, but for pain and emotional distress. The combination of the police report, the restraining order, and the lawsuit finally pierced the protective bubble my parents had built around Julian. The news reached the Sailing Association. His sponsorship was suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. The golden future my parents had mortgaged their lives for was suddenly tarnished, sinking under the weight of his own actions. Nadia also insisted I start therapy. My therapist, a gentle, older woman named Dr. Bennett, had an office filled with thriving plants and soft, comfortable chairs. In that quiet, sunlit room, I began to unpack everything. We talked about the broken ribs, yes, but we also talked about the thousand smaller, preceding fractures. The lifetime of being made to feel secondary, the constant, low-grade ache of being emotionally invisible to the people who were supposed to see me most clearly. It was slow, painstaking work, like untangling 1,000 tiny, knotted threads. I started keeping a journal, filling pages with the words I had swallowed for years. Slowly, tentatively, I began to heal. I started to build a life in my small, beige room. I bought a second-hand armchair and a colorful rug. I put a pot of lavender on the windowsill. I started sleeping through the night without the recurring nightmare of cold tile against my cheek and the sound of my own bones breaking. I found a quiet joy in the simple, solitary routines, brewing my morning tea, walking to the library, choosing a book to read before bed. My world was small, but it was entirely my own. Several months later, scrolling through the city's cultural affairs website, I saw a notice for a new community arts grant. It was for programs designed to empower at-risk youth. An idea, fragile at first, began to form in my mind, an idea born directly from my own long silence. I thought of the teenagers I saw in the library, the quiet ones who sat in the corners, hiding behind books, their shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible weights. I knew that feeling. I spent the next 3 weeks pouring my heart into a proposal. I worked late into the nights in my little apartment, fueled by coffee and a burgeoning sense of purpose. I outlined a free after-school program for young people, especially girls, from difficult home environments. It would be a creative writing workshop, a safe space for them to find and use their voices, to tell their own stories, to learn that what they had to say mattered. I would hold it in the community room of the library, my sanctuary. I called the project The Unwritten Chapter. 2 months later, an official envelope arrived from the city. My hands shook as I opened it. I had gotten the grant. Reading the acceptance letter, a profound, unfamiliar feeling washed over me. It was the feeling of being seen, not for my utility or my quiet compliance, but for an idea that was wholly, completely mine. The final, unexpected reckoning came almost a year after the assault. The Unwritten Chapter was a quiet success. It had started with just 4 teenagers, and now we had a steady group of more than a dozen. We were holding our first public reading event at the main Port Blossom Library, a beautiful old Carnegie building with soaring ceilings and the reverent hush of a cathedral. The community room was full of parents, friends, library patrons, and my fiercely proud, nervous students. I was at the podium, my heart full, speaking about the program's mission of giving a voice to the voiceless. The air was warm with shared celebration. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium burst open with a loud bang, and all heads turned. It was Julian. He looked haggard and thin, a ghost of the golden boy he had once been. The lawsuit had been settled out of court for a sum that had clearly been a significant blow. His sailing career had completely stalled. But the old, familiar rage still burned in his eyes. "You," he yelled, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. He pointed a trembling finger at me. The room fell into a shocked, absolute silence. "You did this. You ruined my life. All of this, because you were clumsy and fell down some stairs." My heart hammered against my ribs, the same ribs he had broken. The old Cora would have shrunk. She would have stammered an apology, wished for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The old Cora would have tried to quiet him, to smooth over the disruption, to take the blame. But I was not the old Cora anymore. With a calmness that felt both foreign and deeply true, I placed my note cards carefully on the podium. I took a steadying breath. Then I stepped down from the small stage and walked slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle, stopping in the middle of the room so that everyone could see me clearly. The silence was so complete I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. I stood there for a moment, in the heart of that silence, and looked directly at my brother. I saw the anger, but underneath it, for the first time, I saw the pathetic weakness of a boy who had never been forced to take responsibility for anything. Then, I turned my back on him and addressed the stunned crowd, the parents, the supporters, the young writers who looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. It was as clear and steady as a lighthouse beam in the fog. "This," I said, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the room, "is the man who broke my ribs." I let the words land, letting the simple, unadorned truth fill the vast space. Then I delivered the final, devastating piece of the story. "And this," I said, my voice dropping only slightly, "is the family who told me to be quiet about it." The silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavier than any shout, more damning than any court verdict. In that profound, absolute quiet, everyone in the room understood. There was no confusion, no question. The truth, once spoken, was undeniable. Two security guards moved in quietly and professionally. They flanked Julian, who seemed to deflate, his rage collapsing into a sputtering, impotent confusion. They escorted him from the building. I never went back to my family. I never received an apology, nor did I seek one. I had learned that some voids cannot be filled, and that true closure does not require the participation of those who harmed you. Julian's life wasn't ruined by me. It was ruined by the consequences of his own violence. My parents didn't lose a daughter. They had discarded one long ago. My peace did not come from vengeance or from their downfall. It came from the quiet, revolutionary act of speaking my truth. It came from the click of the deadbolt in my own apartment, from the proud faces of my students as they read their work, from the simple, profound realization that I did not need their love to be whole. I had my voice. I had my work. I had my quiet, small, beautiful life. And for the first time, looking out at the faces of the young women I was helping to find their own unwritten chapters, I knew it was more than enough. It was everything.